But there are complications sometimes. Some have to do with mere spelling changes. Let me suggest that you imagine English having no written form. And then suddenly, day after tomorrow, someone introduces the alphabet, teaches you how to encode sounds, and you say, oh man, I can write down these words. And you find out how to write the word duck. Perhaps, most likely, you would spell it something like D-U-K, because you'd see no reason to have a C-K, I suppose. But we'll say you write it D-U-K. And then you set out to write the plural, which you already know how to pronounce. It is, after all, the word ducks. How are you going to spell that? Well, you're going to spell it just as it sounds, using an X, right? That's what the X is for in the alphabet. And that's exactly what happened to the Greeks. They had, long before the alphabet came along, they said things like kulix, the KS sound, and kulikes, completely regular. Base ending in K plus sigma for the singular, epsilon sigma for the plural. But when writing came along, and they heard that x sound, they wrote it with the xi. And that always happens wherever there's a KS or a GS sound. Think of our word example, which is written as an X, right? Wherever the KS or GS, or even HES, the one that looks like an X, come together, they spell it with a xi. Similarly, if before writing came along they said goops, they had this word goop, which means vulture. A singular is goops, a plural is goop-s. Well, the goops, the way you write that is with a psi. And similarly for bases that end in beta, and bs also gets spelt this way, and so does fs, phi sigma. So these are all just spelling changes. There are other changes, though, that are more substantive. There are a whole group, there's a row of the nouns, this row, in which the base, as you can see, ends in either delta or tau or theta. These are called dentals. These consonants are called dentals, and that's because they're made by hitting the tongue against the teeth. Da, ta, tha. As it happens in Greek, whenever, not just in these words, but whenever a sigma follows a dental, that dental disappears. It's as though, long before writing ever came about in Greek, people said something like cats, but they'd gotten soft about it. Instead of saying cats, 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 they were saying cas, cas, cas. And so they no longer heard that dental preceding the sigma, and when writing came along, they didn't spell it there because they didn't hear it. But remembering that it was there suddenly explains all these forms, and we understand why we have ornithology, but ornis, because it was originally orniths. That's dentals. There's another category of consonants called liquids. The liquids are these four, M, L, N, R. The sounds that are contained, the consonant sounds contained in millionaire. They're called liquids because they just kind of pour out and just keep going. They don't stop or something. It's like moner, right? In that regard, they're very similar. And in Greek, liquids and sigmas very rarely get along. Almost always, if a liquid bumps up against a sigma, either the liquid will disappear or the sigma will disappear. And you can see that the plurals of all these liquid bases in nu and are entirely regular, but the plurals get weird because when the S was added, the S is the trigger for all this, here and here and here, the S is a problem maker in Greek. When the S is added, when it immediately follows this liquid sound, they have to choose between giving up the liquid and giving up the sigma. And in these nouns, they choose to give up the sigma. And when this sigma disappears, another strange thing happens. Amazon, with an omicron, Amazon. It doesn't take very long to say that syllable, on. But way back when, before they developed this aversion to liquids and sigmas, they didn't say on, they said ons. And ers and retors. Ons takes longer to say than on. Ors takes longer to say than or. And as the sigmas disappeared, these ons and ors stayed long in their pronunciation. They stayed long in their songs and their poems. It just sounded right to hold that syllable. When writing came along, how do you write that longer sound? Well, you don't write it with a short omicron or a short epsilon. Instead, you use the longer vowel, the omega or the eta. And so that's what happened. When the second consonant that made this vowel, this syllable, longer, when that was dropped from pronunciation, the vowel was stretched out a bit to keep the syllable the same length. That's called compensatory lengthening. The syllable was lengthened, the vowel was lengthened to compensate for the loss of the second consonant, the sigma. And that's why you have this change from the base, from on to on, and from or to or. Now, there are a couple of other changes we need to explain, and they have to do with vowels that change valence. It turns out that there are alphas that always stay alphas, and there are alphas that shift to a kind of a different sound. And there are upsilons that always stay upsilons, and then there are some upsilons that shift to a different sound. When the alpha shifts, it does what grammarians call lengthening, and it shifts to an eta. And it turns out that most alphas that end bases are long alphas, that is, they tend to lengthen to etas. Very few, maybe 5% or so of the alpha bases, and in short alphas that stay alphas. Consequently, you'll see lots of words like he, mahe, and not very many like he, amaksa. You'll notice that this alpha lengthens even in masculine words where the alpha isn't the final letter, like navdes. Okay, so alphas often lengthen. This explains the whole why you have Athene, Athenai instead of Athena, Athenai. In some dialects, you would have Athena, Athenai, but in the dialects where now to upsilons. Here is an upsilon that obviously doesn't change. Necus, necues. The base is exactly the same, necu. But you can see in pellecus, pelleces, that the upsilon shifts. It disappears as an upsilon and becomes instead an epsilon. The same happens in os to the upsilon in ostu. In the plural, it becomes ostea, not ostua, but ostea. The explanation is that upsilon is a shape-shifting upsilon, and you mustn't be surprised if in any given form it shifts to an epsilon. And finally, here are two more general explanations you need to deal with, linguistic principles that are necessary to understand how to analyze these nouns. The first involves the digamma, and the second involves the sigma. It happens that both digamma and sigma were heard in Greek apparently as rather soft sounds somehow, so that between vowels they softened and softened to the point that they disappeared. Basileus, in most dialects, not all dialects, some dialects you'll actually find it written as a digamma, but in most dialects, basileus, the w sound became so soft that it simply disappeared, always between vowels. We call this phenomenon disappearance of intervocalic digamma. It's the same thing happens in newes and voes. And the same happens in the plurals with Socrateses, Priereses, and Xifesa. The S becomes so soft between these vowels that intervocalic sigma also disappears. And that explains the form we end up with, Socrates, Prieres, and Xifea. The form will make a whole lot more sense if you remember that there was originally a sigma there. In the singulars, notice that because a sigma is added, the digamma doesn't occur between vowels. Instead, it's a vowel digamma consonant. In this situation, what happens is that the digamma is heard as a kind of a U sound, eus, kind of like our W when it blends with a vowel, as in the past tense of throw, well, in the present tense of throw too, throw or through, EW or OW. We hear the W as though it's part of a diphthong, just another vowel. So that's what happens here. They hear basileus, basileus. Remember, it's a W sound, basileus. Now, if your local alphabet didn't have a digamma in it, how would you spell that? Well, you'd spell it just the way they did, with an upsilon, basileus, basileus. And on all that's what happens to the singulars of all these. A sigma's added, and then the upsilon, or the digamma combines with the vowel to make a diphthong, an upsilon diphthong. In the singulars where there's of the ES basis, the epsilon sigma basis, something kind of similar happens. That is, they knew they were supposed to add, if the base Socrates means Socrates, then to talk about him as the singular subject of a sentence means you add a sigma to it. But when you add a sigma, you don't say Socrates, Socrates. You don't hear two S's any more than we do in a word like actress. But what does happen is that syllable gets held out a bit longer. So, Socrates, Socrates. When writing comes along, it doesn't get written as two S's. Instead, the vowel gets written as a long vowel, and hence you get an eta here instead of an epsilon. It's just the way of spelling the sound ESS, and it's a better way. This is a better way of spelling ESS than ESS is, because ESS says essus. Okay, so those are the important principles you need to learn. I urge you to do so. Go back through all the nouns, all 54 nouns, singular and plural. Make sure you understand what the base is for each of them, what the ending is, and what change occurs. It's very important to do this because it's going to enable you to learn the other 8 forms of every noun that you need to learn. And it's going to enable you to learn them much more easily and quickly than you might imagine. So, let me just quickly show you that in the next chapter, Chapter 4, you're going to learn what are called the genitives, and which we might now schematize as possessives, like the boy's dog. And I can simply tell you how to form all of those, all 54 nouns and their plurals in the genitive. If the base ends in alpha, this is a bit simplified, add sigma. If the base ends in omicron, add upsilon. If the base ends in anything else, add omicron sigma. Those make the genitives. If you want to make the possessive plural of any of them, no matter what declension, add on, omega nu. And whatever changes you performed in the nominative plural, do the same thing to the genitives. If it lost an intervocalic sigma in the nominative plural, it'll lose an intervocalic sigma in the genitive plural. That's so you can make probably an 80% guess, an 80% accurate guess at all these forms just using what I've told you here. Once you understand what the bases are and what the changes are, you'll want to get to work right now and make sure you get it good.